And this is where I'm at with the Shellstrike DS-6 Masterkey barrel. I normally don't do these kinds of attachments, and when it comes to doing this kind of thing, I really honestly can't think of a good way of doing it past this. Sure, I could use another barrel. In fact, I definitely had plans to, and I think if I really wanted to, I could take out the inner barrel on this thing and just extend it out and put a little muzzle brake on the end of it, and that would look pretty good. But to be perfectly honest, I don't think this is going to stay in this configuration for me. But the good news is, if you wanted to replicate it at home, it's very easy. The bad news is, if you wanted to do a different one, it would be way, in fact, easier. Actually, let's talk about that really quick. So here's the Shellstrike that I haven't even unboxed from the original video. And there's a lot to be said with how simple this modification can be, depending on your level of commitment. Because a lot of people, and even myself, kind of thought it would be a lot cooler to take this kind of system and mount it on its side. And that would definitely work, and if you were left-handed, this would give you a nice, comfortable grip. But the problem is, I couldn't think of a way to make that pretty at all. You need to have basically this amount of the grip left over in order to have the catch work, unless you were to come up with a different catch mechanism. And the way this thing's catch works is kind of weird. But that is an option. Left-handers, if you want to have like a cool, it reminds me of like the chain gun thing from Duke Nukem 3D kind of grip. Yeah, this would definitely work, and that puts the shell release in a good position where you can just kind of press it down. Yeah, that would work. You can't mount it the other way because of where that shell ejection is, so it would have to be like that. Or you could basically mount it like this and just pin it at the top of where the barrel, so yeah, basically like that, and you could load a shell into it and close the entire thing. But then you have this big honking piece of plastic with a grip underneath the barrel, and there are very few blasters I can think of where that's going to work. And this may look cool to you right now, totally understandable. The problem is you got to account for this. That is how you prime the blaster. You can, of course, cut this down rather significantly. This has got all of these ridges on it to make it kind of more structurally sound when you're priming, so this piece doesn't flex, because if this piece starts flexing, it's going to have more of a time of priming your blaster back. So, yeah, you basically have to have a good 2 inches of space behind where the actual blaster is in order to make this work. For example, if you see where I prime this, yeah, basically about the maximum amount of space I could give such a thing. But other than that, nothing else is really important on this entire blaster. I mean, everything under this, the whole shell storage area, is completely empty plastic, and thus it could be about as easy as cutting off the grip and hot gluing it to a barrel. I did not do that. I actually used a 2-part epoxy, which is strong enough, I've seen, where it's, you know, there's, you can, yeah, I upgraded the spring a little bit. I didn't really see any improvements, but it's not going to break off or anything like that unless I really, really try. And even then, it's not breaking off, which is bad news if I want to recycle this, but good news for all of those of you at home that just want a really simple underbarrel Masterkey. And it does look pretty good. I mean, you press up on that, it opens up the chamber. A little bit tricky is the fact you have to push this up like that and then close it like that. You can't just drop a barrel. You know, obviously, if I just take a shell and go like that, it's just going to fall right out. Obviously, if you tilt the barrel down more, you can just drop a shell in and close it. That works perfectly fine as well. I chose the Delta Trooper barrel because it had the same kind of pattern on it, and I, again, didn't want to have to paint this. And I left enough of this grip on there so where even with my tiny hands, I can grip this perfectly fine, and I can prime it very easily, and if I need to fire it, boom! And then if I need to shell eject it, I can just take that and push that up. It's a little bit difficult when you haven't primed the blaster beforehand. Again, I put a little bit of an upgraded spring in there compared to the stock one. Let's talk about springs in the stock one. In fact, let's take the stock one apart really quick so I can show you what the internals look like and what you're going to do with it. It's a pretty annoying disassembly, I should say. Okay, well, this one was a lot easier to take apart, and hilariously enough, a lot of people thought I broke the plunger tube on my other Shellstrike when I was taking it apart. This one is the exact same way. All the Shellstrike plunger tubes look like they've been broken at some point, which makes me wonder if they've retooled this from another project. But The main point is that anything past this space right here is not used by the blaster at all. That's where it catches, so you're not losing anything from this part being broken back there. And it is, you know, it looks like it's almost completely symmetrical, except for this little lip right here, which the shell opening device right there caps onto, is not on the other side of the blaster, so you cannot make this ambidextrous. I mean, you probably could if you were to put something on the side of the plunger tube for that to catch onto, but is it worth it? I have no idea. Maybe if you just absolutely hate where that lever release is. So inside, first thing to note is that, yes, it's a pretty big plunger tube. It is apparently a little bit smaller than the one in the Trilogy, and about half the volume-wise than the one inside of the Sledge Fire. And because of all this extra stuff glued to the front of it, it's going to be a rather difficult mod to get extra power oomph out of this. You can't just drop in a new plunger tube. We're going to have to get creative with that. Probably have to put something in here or extend this one back. The plunger head and everything is a little weird, I should say. It's got a weird guide in there that means you can't use a spring basically bigger than a retaliator spring inside of it. Anything bigger, it's not going to work. And yes, this is pretty much a retaliator spring. The stock spring is not very beefy at all, but with the slight upgrade I did, I improved the seal a little bit, put it in there, because stock, it doesn't have, in my opinion, the best seal. Like, yeah, it's not great. But again, replacing with a random spring, I found that was a little bit stronger. I didn't really seem to get any performance increase out of it, so I don't have any really strong springs for Retaliator laying around, but if I did, that would be a very good upgrade, I would say. Keep in mind that if you do increase the spring load on this, what's going to wind up happening is that the lever release, since this does push the plunger tube back every single time you do that, yeah, it's going to become really hard to do that without priming the blaster first. And since the priming bar works in the way it does, it's going to be very difficult for you to prime back if you upgrade that spring load, because this spring load is light and it's already having these issues. This bar right here seems to be only there to attach this spring to it. So it's the return spring for this kind of slide thing. You kind of pop the one side on there. Come on. There we go. And then you pop the other side on top of that rod. That's the return mechanism for the entire thing. And the way this works out is that you've got this hook on the plunger rod. So the spring compresses against this little rest right there. And then the plunger rod itself, it has this hook on it that actually goes pointed towards the right and fits in there like that. So it's not exactly the most structurally sound mechanism I've ever seen, but I've definitely seen worse. The main star here is the completely crazy catch mechanism with the trigger. So the trigger actually slides between the catch mechanism and look at that. That is so weird. I've never seen that in a blaster before. It's a really compact design, but I thought like the catch would be more up here somewhere, like a little lever or something like that. It's not. So the most you can cut it down to is right here. So you're gonna have, so pretty much no matter what, you're gonna have at least that much of the grip on there, unless you completely redesign this, which at the moment I don't know exactly how you would do that, because the spring and everything rests inside the grip. There's a little rubber piece right here. There's just one of them. The top part is for the top shell. The bottom part is for the bottom shell. That's how it holds the shells together. And there is this torsion spring inside of the barrel that helps it flip out. But of course there is no release mechanism or anything inside of the barrel to eject the shells. And that's basically the entire mechanism. The hardest part of putting this thing back together is just doing something like, there is of course this little spring right here that goes on the plunger tube that rests in this section right there. That's to push the plunger tube forward even when you've primed the blaster back. And that's essentially the entire blaster. There's really nothing more to it. Keep in mind when you're putting it back together, you're going to want to push the plunger tube back a little bit, so the shell ejection lever right there will mesh up right here on the side of the plunger tube. But it's very, very simple. And does it have mod potential? Of course it does. That's a pretty beefy plunger tube, you know, regardless. And there's definitely room for a pretty big spring upgrade. I'm not sure how good this catch is, but I heard from Valor that he stuffed a 10 kilogram Retaliator spring in there and he got a pretty decent performance boost. And I just don't have any Retaliator springs laying around, which is weird because I have a lot of Retaliators. I'll have to look a little bit harder for one. Now we go to what I did. So I obviously cut down the blaster as much as possible and just put in a different spring. I found that fit in there that worked a little bit better. Again, I'm not seeing a very noticeable increase, and just put some Teflon tape underneath the L-ring and the plunger and gave it a little bit of a better seal. Again, that didn't help out a whole lot, but it goes right on top of that. You can see pretty much exactly where I cut. Again, you don't need to have any of the spot up here. There's no internals in there, and just below that spot, I mean, that is as far as you can go. It's relatively simple. I just use a 2-part epoxy to line this thing up. Usually what I do is I grab the piece, I mark out where I'm going to cut it, I cut it, sand it flat as best I can, and then I attach it to the blaster and kind of hold it in place, and I'll generally tack it in place with hot glue. That way I can pull both things apart, look at it, and then when I notice that it's like, yeah, it's kind of where I want it, then I do the inside parts, I fill that full of epoxy, and that usually makes it look somewhat clean. There's not a whole bunch of epoxy on the outside. If I wanted to make this look prettier and more like it meant to belong there, I would have, of course, sanded it down way more, and I would have filled in these gaps with epoxy putty, because nothing above that is important. I could have also cut up the barrel, but the idea here was to make it look relatively functional and nice without having to do any kind of crazy painting or anything like that. And this is a really cool blaster to have as an underbarrel because of the way that it works and the fact that it's a usable shotgun blast, and if you were to put this on the right blaster, it would look pretty good. I don't see a reason not to do something like this, but again, if you can stomach it, like, because if you hold it with, like, your primary hand as your left hand and you could have that kind of grip going on, that might work, although, I guess, like, I mean, something like this, I guess? Yeah, you can have your main blaster back here and then the grip up there. That feels really weird to me, but it's an easy mod to do if you want to do it the absolute minimum, and even if you want to do it like somewhat functional integration like what people have been doing for Mavericks since time began, it's really easy to just cut it up and glue it just like this. And I didn't really see a barrel it wouldn't work with. Just keep in mind, if you were to do something like this, you have to have a good amount of space behind it for that prime, because if that goes up, and even if I were to put this on the wrong blaster or something, that could not prime back all the way. Again, you can cut it and save yourself about an inch, half an inch, if you were to cut it to basically about right there, because all of this is just hollow empty plastic. That would reduce your draw, but you might run into some flexing issues. And I think that's about as far as I'm going to go with this project. I did the video. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it like this. I might just chip away the stuff and pry it off and go towards what I was originally going to do, which is trying to make a break-action double-barreled shotgun, which, of course, everybody wants to see. But give me some ideas for the next couple of days, and I'll figure out what I'm going to do. Because I could just integrate this into a bigger blaster. Like Project Build, I kind of want to have this on there, because it just... if this were made into a proper blaster integration, it would look rather spiffy, because then you could fill in all these gaps and everything and still have it exceedingly comfortable. But other than that, I'm Walcom S7. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you learned something. I do hope this inspires you to get out there and create your own foam-flinging monstrosities. But regardless, I hope to see you in an entirely different video.
You gotta up, upside down.